Today's conference, Prison Reentry, Breaking the Cycle, understands the scourge of American prisons today and what we need to do to break the cycle of recidivism and ultimately incarceration. The next gentleman is the person who had possessed the vision and the clarity of the vision to organize this conference. He's a young man, I believe, who's not only assiduously focused at developing job opportunities in Jersey City and all the stats of new commercial development, but most importantly is linking communities, and particularly communities of color, to those job opportunities through training and development. And as today, prison reentry, for so many of us, we sort of drive past those large concrete walls and forget that they're human beings. But in a special way, there are very few elected officials on the municipal level who would have had the dignity and the courage and the decency to espouse for a population that doesn't vote, that isn't politically engaged, for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to call upon a great public servant, a man of character and courage, the Mayor of Jersey City, Stephen Michael Fulop.
Good morning. I have the privilege of welcoming you today, and let me start by saying thank you to President Cornacchia. Thank you to the entire St. Peter's University community for hosting today's conference. It's been a lot of work to really get to this point. Let me also thank our panelists. Let me say thank you to all those who lived through the criminal justice system, those who have worked with prosecutors, those who worked with the public defenders, those who work with the judiciary, those who have been incarcerated, some of which are here, those who help keep inmates incarcerated, and those who have advocated against incarceration. My hope is that today we rise above our individual perspectives and work to try to reclaim the lives of those who have been incarcerated. See, America is frankly doing something very, very wrong. We are incarcerating today more of our fellow citizens as a percentage of our population than any nation in the world. Yes, we are sadly number one. We in this country have the highest incarceration rate in the entire world. And as we've yearned to secure the highest standard of living and bridge differences in communities, we seemingly have lost our way on some issues as to equity and moral balance in our society. Nowhere is this more apparent than examining the grossly distorted American incarceration rates. In this country, with 5% of the world's population, America locks up 25% of the world's incarcerated population. It is a statistic that is sad and clearly points to failure. And furthermore, with 70% of our inmates classified as addicts, why is it that we lock criminals up for extended periods of time without the benefit of addiction treatment? Does it not make sense that when we have the benefit of securing people away from the madness of the streets to provide treatment, that we would do something, yet instead of beginning treatment for the disease of addiction, we simply replace the madness of the streets with a new madness, the controlled chaos of what we call prison? America can do much, much better. Our prisons, with their barbed wire, lack of educational programming, and limited treatment, are a moral cancer on society. I know that I drive by, as many of you drive by, the Northern State Prison and Hudson County Jail with really callous indifference almost every day. Yet for the people who are residing in state prison or county jail or federal prison, their ability to successfully re-enter society is in part dependent on what we do here today. We, as policymakers, as advocates, as citizens of conscience, must ask ourselves, why is it so simple to spend $45,000 a year to incarcerate, however, not a fraction of that cost to ensure the success of a person transitioning from incarceration to freedom? Americans, whether they be Republican, whether they be Democrats, Muslims, Jews, Christians, progressives, conservatives, anybody who is thoughtful of whatever belief, clearly recognize that our prison system is an abysmal failure. And what other enterprise, I ask you, what other enterprise in American society could have a 2/3 failure rate and continue to be sustained with unprecedented public financial support. That's right. Statistics demonstrate upwards of 2/3 of ex-offenders will commit a serious felony within 3 years of release, and yet we accept this as the norm. Today, through this conference, you will hear a hopeful message, a message of how Jersey City, of how Hudson County are working together to maximize the opportunities of formerly incarcerated people. The rigorous addiction treatment provided by Integrity, housing opportunities provided by Hudson County, employment and training from Jersey City, we are providing hope to people who are rock bottom, many of whom are not strong enough to provide for the entirety of their lives after years of incarceration. What we do here is not only good, but it is what we are really commanded to do as Jews, as Christians, as Muslims, people of goodwill. We are asked to help the least of our brethren. In this season of Passover, when we commemorate the ancient Israelites' difficult passage from Pharaoh's slavery to the Promised Land, let us not delude ourselves as to the ease of that proposition. Indeed, it is really incarceration which is easy and secure. What we propose today is not that. It's far messier, it's uncertain, but I think we all recognize that it is clearly ennobling. And with 97% of inmates ultimately returning to civil society, our answer to them shall and should be, we will do what is not easy, what is not certain, and we will strive through the difficult process of making people whole again to rejoin society. I think that we are required to ask more of ourselves, more of ex-offenders, and more of society as a whole. As Pope Francis washed the feet of prisoners last year, I want to say that this year, on this Holy Thursday, we also have a deep responsibility to help those who want to change the criminal narratives of their lives. That is the hope of Passover, that's the gift of Easter, and the promise of today's conference. I say thank you all for believing. I say thank you all for believing that we can do better. Because you're here, I know that we can. Thank you.
The next speaker is someone not only possesses the fancy degrees from Princeton and Harvard and really bright fellow. You know, being in the U.S. Attorney's Office, you are the chief law enforcement officer, representative of the federal government. But what I find special about this person, about this exceptional man, is that he instituted a prison reentry program on the federal level. And in the midst of prosecutions, in the midst of making our state safer, he understands a core principal value is reclaiming lives. And he's established a reentry program working, and you'll hear from some of the people today, but that would not have been possible without a tenacious commitment to justice. And as the prophet Micah says, and in Judaism, it's not just the quality of mercy. Justice is required. It's required of us. And now someone who's done that from a deep well of decency and integrity, our U.S. Attorney, Paul Fishman.
I want to thank you and Mayor Fulop for having the vision and the commitment to organize this conference and for bringing us all together. The program looks incredible, and my only regret is that another commitment I had this morning won't let me stay after my speech. But this topic is so critical and so central to the mission of my office and to the United States Department of Justice that I am really, really honored that you asked me to take the opportunity to kick off the program by highlighting what the Justice Department is doing across the country, and in particular what we're doing here in New Jersey in federal court. Every other Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, about 24 people come to a courtroom on the second floor of the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Courthouse in Newark. At first, it really looks like a lot of other proceedings in that courthouse. A federal magistrate judge, my friend Madeline Cox-Arleo, who is here at table 2, sits on the bench. In what we call the well of the courtroom, at the 2 tables that are usually occupied by lawyers or their clients, there are a couple of lawyers from the Federal Public Defender's Office, 4 or 5 people from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and at least 1 or 2 or 3 people from the United States Probation Office. Behind them, sitting on benches usually occupied by spectators, are about 15 other people. But this proceeding is different. Everyone on those benches has very recently left federal prison, some with a stop at a halfway house, others directly from jail. And one by one, each of them is called to the front of the courtroom and sits down at one of the tables to talk to the judge. "How is your daughter?" she asks one. "Tell me about your new apartment," she inquires of another. "Can we help you print your resume? Do you want a lawyer to help you get a payment plan so you can get your driver's license back? Do you have to leave early today to get to class?" And finally, the last question she asks, "What do you need from us?" That is an extraordinary thing. And as you listen to her questions, and you hear the answers, and you watch the interaction among all of those people, you begin to realize that there is something very special and really inspiring going on in courtroom 2A. The last time those defendants were in that courthouse, lawyers from my office were asking a different judge to send them to prison for a substantial period of time. The last time those defendants were in that courthouse, a judge explained how the things that they had done and the crimes that they had committed required that they receive a meaningful period of incarceration. Now, when they walk in, members of my office and court personnel are editing their resumes, teaching them how to interview for a job, and offering to tutor them in math. The judge is helping them register for college, find apartments, and get jobs, and is literally taking them to a charter school to help them enroll their kids. Now that they have served their time, those defendants are being asked by lawyers and staff from the same U.S. Attorney's Office that sent them to jail and by a federal judge working with very dedicated probation officers and public defenders, many of whom are here today, "What do you need from us?" How did we get here? And is there an inconsistency? And the answer is no. And let me tell you how we got here. We have, as the mayor just said, a crisis in this country. Our federal and state prisons currently house 1.5 million people. Hundreds of thousands of more are in local jails. In all, we estimate that more than 1 in 100 adults are behind bars. More than 200,000, about 217,000, are in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And it is my job, and the job of the people who work in my office, to put several hundred more there every year. In my judgment, those people have committed crimes for which that is the appropriate punishment. But for almost all of them, their incarceration does not and should not last forever. More than 95% of federal prisoners will be released, and when they are, the overwhelming majority will go home, or somewhere near where they once called home. And it is on that journey and at its destination that they may well fail if they don't have help. Many come back to families that are barely intact if they are there at all. Housing is hard to find, and jobs are even tougher. It's hard enough in today's economy for lots of people without criminal records to find work. And here, we've been particularly slow to recover. Imagine what it's like for those just out of prison to compete in that environment. And then add in the educational obstacles. Of the 20 fastest growing occupations in this country, 13 require a post-secondary education. But only 22% of prisoners have any post-secondary experience, compared to more than half of the rest of us. 2 in 5 prison and jail inmates, 40%, lack a high school diploma or its equivalent. And even when ex-offenders get a job, they face an uphill battle. A report from the Pew Charitable Trust found that past incarceration reduced subsequent wages by more than 10%, cut annual employment, and reduced yearly earnings by more than that. And it turns out that the ability to find a job after being released from prison is one of the greatest predictors of success on the outside. But without the foundations that the rest of us work so hard to build and to maintain, that many of us, quite frankly, take for granted, The recently released are often alone, tempted by their past lives, sometimes still on the hook of an addiction, and too frequently with too few alternatives to falling or stumbling back into a life that they want to avoid if they can. So it's hardly surprising that so many fail. In fact, as the mayor just said, nationally, 2 out of every 3 people released from state prison will be arrested again within 3 years of their release. Half of those released will end up back in prison in that same time. Released federal prisoners do a little better. They have a 40% chance of being rearrested or having their supervision revoked, which would send them back to prison. Those numbers and the realities they present are daunting. With roughly 700,000 people coming out of our state and federal prisons every year, plus the millions that flow through the jails at the local level, recidivism has terrible consequences for the lives of offenders and their families. It has serious implications for public safety. And with the resources already strained, really strained at the federal, state, and local level, it just costs too much money. The Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates that more than $74 billion is spent on federal, state, and local corrections annually. And it costs nearly $30,000 to house a federal inmate for a year. So how do we stop this terrible cycle? At the national level, my boss, Attorney General Eric Holder, has convened a federal reentry council to try to bring down the barriers that stop former prisoners from succeeding. The council comprises 20 federal agencies, all with common goals: to make our communities safer by reducing recidivism and victimization, to help those getting out to become productive citizens, and to save limited resources. How do they do that? Well, part of it is just by raising awareness. There are a huge number of misconceptions out there about the rights and obligations of those who have served time. Can they live in public housing? Yes. Can you get tax credits for hiring them? Yes. Can employers get bonded against theft? Yes. And so, among other things, the council has promoted a series, and you can see it online, of what they call Mythbusters, answering those questions, among others. Part of it is just knocking down systemic barriers and obstacles that make it difficult for people who have already been held accountable and who have paid for their crimes to contribute productively and to support themselves, their families, and the economy. In April 2011, the Attorney General Holder sent a letter to every Attorney General of every state in the country, citing a comprehensive study cataloging more than 38,000 statutes across the 50 states and other territories that impose collateral consequences on people convicted of crimes. Although some of those restrictions undoubtedly serve public safety, many impose unnecessary burdens, including the denial of employment and housing opportunities that cripple an individual who is trying to make a new start. So he asked the states to evaluate relevant laws and policies, and he made the department's resources available to provide the support. And we in the Department of Justice have looked to our own house for conducting a review of federal collateral consequences identified in the study. Early last year, the Justice Department, under Attorney General Holder's leadership, also began a comprehensive review of the criminal justice system across the board, including the way we charge, the way we sentence, the way we incarcerate, and reentry. And that process was designed to identify areas in which federal laws can be enforced more fairly and more efficiently. The idea was to figure out which practices were more successful and which might actually be working against our goals. The resulting initial reform package, which the Attorney General has called the Smart on Crime Initiative, is already driving us to re-examine our priorities, to more fairly enforce laws and apply just punishments, to strengthen protection for vulnerable populations, and to focus even more than we were on prevention and reentry. The final piece is targeting services at the population we're trying to reach. This has to start in jail. As the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons has pointed out, most federal prison inmates leave needing job skills, vocational training, education, counseling, and other assistance such as drug abuse treatment, anger management, parenting skills, and a link to community resources for continuity of care if they are to continue and to successfully enter society. In other words, today's Bureau of Prisons realizes that reentry begins the day that an inmate enters and not when he or she leaves. And I have to say, I have a former client. I spent 12 years in private practice in between my government stints. And I have a client who firmly believes that reentry actually needs to start before they go in, that during the process of preparing to go, that the families and the defendant need to grapple with how they're going to survive during the time that that person is away. And we have to help them do that too. And it has to continue in the halfway houses where many federal inmates begin their reintegration. But for too long, the policies and the culture of those facilities were actually counterproductive in lots of ways. So just last month, Attorney General Holder announced that the Justice Department would require federal halfway houses, which saw 30,000 inmates go through their doors in just the past year, to enhance their treatment services. Those houses will now have to provide a specialized form of treatment to prisoners, including those with mental health and substance abuse issues, to provide greater assessment to inmates who are pursuing job opportunities, such as, and think about this, permitting them to have cell phones in the halfway houses so they can actually talk to employers and prospective employers and not be out of touch when they're there, and to provide funds for their transportation. In other words, allowing inmates expanded access to re-enter society while they are in the halfway house. But even that isn't enough. So here's how we got to courtroom 2A. 3 years ago, I asked people in my office and people in the courthouse if we could do better. I asked if we had the resources, the time, the money, and the commitment to try something new. There were others who were already running or participating in reentry projects around the country, but we had never done it in federal court in New Jersey. Those conversations and the hard work of a lot of people led to the development of the first federal reentry court in New Jersey, what we call our Renew program. That hard work, and most of all, the hard work of the program participants who have dedicated themselves to reimagining their lives, are why courtroom 2A is such a special place. Because we know that it isn't enough just to provide the right services. We have to provide them at the right time, in the right way. Former offenders are at a unique crossroad, poised to become law-abiding contributors to society or frequent flyers in the criminal justice system. They need to know the path of redemption is theirs to choose, and that they will be supported in that journey and in that decision to leave what is familiar and trade it in for the prospect of a better future. To be clear, this is not a program for white-collar criminals who just did 18 months in a minimum security prison. The participants in our program were convicted of manufacturing and distributing dangerous narcotics, of selling and transporting firearms, and other very serious and dangerous crimes. They served years, in some cases 10 years or more, in federal prison, and were determined to be some of the most likely to reoffend, not the least likely. Because of those challenges, it is not all smooth sailing. They have to work long hours at difficult jobs, often more than one, and pursue challenging education and other programs to make progress. Some have family members who are just not supportive, and others have the wrong friends who just want to reunite with their old buddies. Some just are not quite ready to turn away from their previous lives. So like everybody else, some of our participants make mistakes. There are excuses, impediments, and apologies. And there are sanctions. Some have to stay in the program for longer, losing credit. Some end up being directed to do some community service, and others get some additional house arrest. But all of it is geared toward getting those individuals back on their feet, ready and able to make it. And every 2 weeks, they remind us why this work is so important, and they impress us with their ability to evolve and to persevere. Amare Terrell was a straight-A student until at around the age of 13, he began to rebel against his mother. He was sent to live with his paternal grandparents and with his father, a heroin addict who introduced him to the drug culture of the streets. He dropped out of high school, had a number of run-ins with the law, and in December of 2008 was prosecuted by my office for conspiracy to distribute heroin. Last year, he was one of the first to participate voluntarily in our reentry court. Now, in front of Judge Arleo and other participants, Mr. Terrell is leading in a different way. He obviously takes his role as a father very seriously. He talks to the judge about his need for health insurance and a 401k. And he's focused on what he needs to do to keep his life on track. Last winter, as Governor McGreevey alluded to, winter like New Hampshire, one of the people in the program talked to Mr. Terrell about the fact that with the impending snowstorm, he was worried because he had no food in his house. And those of you who know the urban areas in Essex County know that grocery stores are not so plentiful. And he didn't know what he was going to do. Mr. Terrell told him to meet him in 10 minutes at a grocery store, where he bought him $70 worth of groceries. And with our encouragement, Mr. Terrell recently spoke to a group of people suspected of committing the worst crimes in a neighborhood in Newark and presented a powerful message about what he lost when he broke the law. Next month, Amari Terrell will be one of the first 4 to graduate from our program, and he knows what that means to him and to us. Also graduating is Eddie Wilson. Eddie's mother and father were intravenous drug users who both died of HIV/AIDS. He was raised by his grandmother, who also passed away when Mr. Wilson was still a teenager. He was prosecuted by my office for selling guns and ammunition to an undercover ATF agent. From the start of Reentry Court, Mr. Wilson was focused on getting his college degree, which has led to Judge Arleo calling him the professor in court. His dedication is clear. He lived in a shelter until he could save enough money to pay for his own apartment. But he never seemed down. When asked by the judge about his situation, he might say it was hard because he didn't have any food, or he might let her know that he had to be out of the shelter by 7 o'clock in the morning. But he would also say that it was probably good because it helped him get up earlier to start studying. And the judge, encouraging his dedication, has helped him to get a job at the college he attends. Like Mr. Terrell, Mr. Wilson shows real ownership of this program. More than a few times, he has come to court and alerted everybody else, the judge, the people from probation, the U.S. Attorney's Office of Defenders, and his fellow participants, about other programs in town which might help them with rent and furniture. Through these contributions and being a role model, he has probably taught everybody else in the program as much as we have taught him. Mohammed Shabazz, the last of the 3 I'll talk about, is one of our newest participants. He was released from the halfway house only in February. He also has the distinction of having served 14 years or so in federal prison, one of the longest sentences of anyone in the reentry court for distribution of heroin and cocaine. In spite of that, or maybe because of it, he comes across in court as someone who is spiritual and has thought a great deal about how he wants to live his life and what comes next. He has a job and has resumed a stable relationship with the woman to whom he was engaged when he went to prison. He has a facility for math and will likely return to school to study accounting. One side note on the extent to which our reentry court is completely full service. Shortly after he joined the program, Mr. Shabazz made the mistake, perhaps maybe not a mistake, of telling the court that he had resumed living with a longtime girlfriend and that they had had a religious wedding, but they were not formally married. Judge Arleo offered to perform the ceremony. He put her off. She offered again, and again, and again. She even offered to buy a cake. None of that is surprising if you know Judge Arleo. Finally, they set a date, and one Tuesday evening, not so very long ago, in courtroom 2A, when we heard Mr. Shabazz and his wife recite the vows that they had written in front of Judge Arleo and the other members of the reentry court, we learned that Mr. Shabazz is not only good at math, but he's kind of a poet as well. Today, you will hear other stories from Judge Arleo, from Tom Eicher, the chief of my office's criminal division, and perhaps from Mr. Terrell and Mr. Shabazz and Mr. Wilson, all of whom I think planned to be here today. You will hear about their successes and their failures, their excitement and their despair. You will learn that as much work as the reentry team does to find job opportunities, housing, furniture, and even schools and daycare for their children, it is the participants themselves who direct and control their experience. It is our job it is our responsibility to give them the opportunity to do just that. And it's not just for them. As long as 1 in 28 American children and 1 in 9 African American children go to bed each night with an incarcerated parent, as long as our kids are continuing the cycle of generational crime by embarking on lifetimes of involvement with the justice system, our work is not done. I and the people who work with me in the U.S. Attorney's Office understand that we will only succeed if we take a multifaceted approach to law enforcement. As I have said, and as the Attorney General said on many occasions, we will never arrest our way out of the crime problem. We understand the need to be smart on crime. Only by emphasizing prevention and reentry together with enforcement do we have a chance to make a real and lasting impact on the problems of violence that plague our communities. On Monday night, like Mayor Fulop, I sat at my family's Seder and reflected on the ideas of redemption, of spiritual reawakening, of the rebirth that comes with spring, all the themes of Passover. This Sunday, Christians will celebrate Easter, a holiday that celebrates many of the same ideas and the same hopes, and our collective ability to stretch beyond our limitations and to change ourselves for the better. But no matter our religion, no matter where we come from, no matter what we think or what we believe, I and the people who work with me on the Renew Court understand that promise, and we see it every day. We are a group that believes in second chances. Redemption is about the triumph of hope over despair, the belief that we all have the ability for and the potential for change, and maybe to even do it dramatically when the road is hard. And if it takes someone, sometimes a federal judge or sometimes somebody else, to ask the question, to look us in the eye, and to say, what do you need? Thank you all very much for coming.
Today's conference would not have been possible without Joe Hayden, who was instrumental in the planning and the design. And I just want to express my appreciation to Joe. And at this time, not only a great criminal defense attorney, but somebody who's helped us so immeasurably in our reentry program. He's serving as MC of this particular panel, and you're hearing from the voices of people who have come back into reentry. Joe Hayden. Joseph?
I have had the privilege of practicing law in this state for 45 years. During the 45 years, I've attended over 100 panels or conferences. This panel is by far the most important, the most meaningful conference I have ever attended. Because, as Mayor Fulop has written in another context, what we're dealing with here is beyond a moral issue. It is a practical issue. How will our society function? It's a problem that we cannot run away from, we cannot hide from. And as a matter of fact, it has been written by scholars that a society is only as civilized as is the quality of its prisons. And the quality of the prisons is really defined by the opportunities afforded for reentry. So let's get to work. What we have here are a number of individuals, all of whom have been in incarceration and have made it back to the other side. Their stories are different, but the struggle continues. And as the mayor and as U.S. Attorney Fishman has said, it's about redemption, but what we all want to appreciate and have our consciousness raised to is how hard it is and how many obstacles there are, physically, economically, spiritually, to go about to reentry. And our first speaker is a gentleman by the name of Jason Scala. Jason lives in Hoboken. He has a business in Hoboken, but he does not forget where he came. And he reaches back and helps people in recovery. And he, with his business, employs people in recovery and employs ex-offenders because he believes in a second chance Jason Scala.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What a privilege and an honor it is to be here today. Looking around, I don't think I've ever been in a room with this many law enforcement without wearing handcuffs. My addiction has influenced most of my life. And as a result, I've spent over 7 years in prison, jails, and institutions. I'm grateful for every institution I've ever landed in. They've truly saved my life. About 3 years ago, I was rescued once more and landed in Hudson Correction Facility. Eager to want to rebuild my life and start over, I did not know how. I was fortunate enough to run into a counselor on a drug tier there. And he asked me to put a slip in and said, write on it that you need help. And I believe the strongest act of courage anyone could ever do is to ask for help. And that's when my recovery had began. And I did everything asked of me, and I had the privilege to stay there 6 months. Upon my release, now it's just not only being released from jail when it happens, it's the wreckage you leave before you get there that you have to face. It's not only not being able to fill out a job application, not having any source of income, but the stigma of being a junkie, of being an ex-con, of stealing from your loved ones and the community. I mean, it goes much further than just needing a second chance. How do other people get over it? The closest ones in your life will not be able to get over it right away. And I believe my recovery started in that jail, but once I left, I found the only place I can turn to was the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. Once getting there, though, I mean, I returned to a home. My wife was in financial ruin from my addiction. There was a plumbing leak. Our bed got ruined. We could not afford a new one. She was sleeping on a love seat with 2 dogs while I slept on the floor next to her. I'm happy to say we have a fabulous bed, and the dogs have never been happier. But the struggles, nobody would hire me. Imagine starting over with addiction has taken away any college degree I could have been able to achieve, any ability to apply for a city job, or even Home Depot. As I said, I think I have somewhat of 9 felonies. I'm not quite sure. So where do you start? I work for free. I let people know how hard I was willing to work and to show up and to display my skill set that I had. I was fortunate enough to be born with certain talents and certain influences that did show me how to work. Little by little, showing up every day and doing the right thing, life has started to take a different turn. 3 years later, I have now become an employer, which I employ 10 people in the community on a consistent basis. I think my company in the last 2 years has completed 230 jobs. I'm a contractor in downtown Jersey City. I'm a continuing active member in Narcotics Anonymous. I also work with a lot of men from the Salvation Army. I have an overwhelming amount of gratitude for people that helped me. I have a Salvation Army about 4 blocks away from me where guys get entered in. And just as that example was set for me, I feel that I need to set that example for them. And I know you guys are here for certain programs, and a lot of this is still not reaching many people. Guys get sentenced to this program, and they have no financial means. I think they get about $7 a week. They're not allowed cell phones, which sometimes I think is a good thing, but they have no sponsorship really coming in there. I try to go over there. And they don't have much opportunity for employment after they leave there except working for the place. So I do try to provide. I always say I don't worry about somebody's skill set. I worry about more of how much of a program they're working, because without recovery, I'm unemployable. And I set that example for these men also. everything started in that correctional facility for me. And I think I heard that spoken earlier, that the decision was made. Decisions can't be, never underestimate the power of example. Decisions can't be made until you see what you want. I often tell my customers that. They don't know what they want until I could show them. And I believe most addicts, most reentrers don't even know what's possible until you can show them. You know, I was fortunate enough to have a supportive wife that I've built trust with, and family and community that came around in its time. I'm not going to say I was trusted right away, but where do we get that platform to gain that trust again? Where do we get that platform to put a foothold in the community? Today, as I was waiting online, I had 2 business emails and 3 tenants that needed issues resolved that rent from me from buildings I own today. And, you know, how grateful am I to have that chance, and how many other people can excel if they can get that chance?
I would like to say that I've been in a lot of jails, prisons, and I was incarcerated at Hudson County Correctional Facility. And by me being there, I joined the, it was a lifesaver for me, because by me being there, I joined the reintegration program, and they helped me get back into society. I made the decision that I wanted to change my life. I wanted to turn my life around because I knew it was something more to life than what I was doing. I wanted to better myself. I wanted to do it for myself, not for my family, not for my kids or spouse. I wanted to do it for myself. So I joined reintegration. I met a lot of influential people that paved the way for me. And when I spent 8 months in Hudson County, by me being there, I met Jim McGreevy, I met Miss Hannah, I met Rick Johnson, Miss Muhammad, Miss Ellen. And like I said, they paved the way for me. When I got out, I went to Most Excellent Way there's a program there, and there's a housing setting, a transitional housing setting, and there I met Miss Gloria Wharton. She's the best. By me being there, where I'm at now, I did C-Line program too. All my programs that I have got when I left Hudson County Correctional Facility, I completed, graduated with a certificate. Where I'm at now, by me being in Miss Gloria Wharton house, I runs the house. I'm chief there. I work there. I orientate the girls, and I'm up under Miss Gloria Wharton, and I let them know what we expect of them as of myself. While I was there, I'm also working at Same Sky, making bracelets for the ladies in Rwanda who have HIV. By me making the bracelets out of love, it supports them, it send them to school, buy their medicine and everything. I just would like to say that I'm glad I went to Hudson County Correctional Facility, because if it wasn't for Hudson County having a program there called reintegration, I don't know how I would have done it. I never had that type of setting, like as far as me being incarcerated. I just did the time and I came home. Hudson County Correctional Facility offered me something, and it was their program, reintegration, so I thank them for having that program in their facility. And like I said, by me getting out and going to Miss Gloria Wharton, I thank her for believing in me, because she helped me. She helps me a lot. We group there. We have, I go to my NAs, and I have a mentor, of course, and I just want to give back. So that's why I'm here, to let people know that what you have done and what I have done, it doesn't define who I am. It doesn't. There is... You can't just get out. You have to make up your mind, and you have to want to do it for yourself. You have to want to do it, because if you don't do it for yourself, you're doomed to destruction. So what I have learned was to just, every day is a struggle for me. Just take it one step at a time. I'm not worried about what people say about me. I'm not worried about what they think about me, because that's not who I am. And I just wanted to say thank you again to everybody, like Miss Gloria Wharton, I love you. Miss Hannah, Rick, Miss Muhammad, of course, and Miss Ellen, and Judge Isabella, Alicia Lera, because if it wasn't, in Hudson County Correctional Facility, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. and I'm waiting to go to school for my CNA. So I'm very busy. I stay busy. Thank you.
Over the last 13 or 14 years, I've been incarcerated for quite a few of them. I've probably been incarcerated between 12 and 15 times throughout that time period. First off, let me thank those who spoke before me. I look down the tables at the men and women sitting next to me, and I feel like everybody looks and sounds very, very successful, very, very beautiful people, very, very welcoming people. And I would be hard-pressed to think that you would think the same thing if you saw what I looked like on paper. And I'm sure for some of these people, the same is true. And I'd like to thank Jim, of course, for asking me to speak here, and the few keynote speakers who spoke before me. They really laid out a great factual basis of why it's so hard for people like us to reintegrate into society. Because like I said, if you looked at me on paper, I have 14 felony convictions. I've been sent to prison multiple times. I've been to the worst of the worst places. And, I have a mirror at my house. I know I don't look like that stereotypical person that goes to prison over and over again. The person that has aggravated assault charges and robberies and that kind of thing. But if you look at me on paper, you, as humans, which we do, prejudge me, people like me and other people. And I think that knowing that has held me back for the longest time, because I just felt I should just fit that stigma. That's who I'm going to be. Where else can I go? I'm already at the bottom. I might as well just make it comfortable. And speaking of comfortability, that's what prison was for me. Not because I'm some tough guy and I did anything phenomenal on a basis like that in prison, but just because I was given everything I needed. I knew if I followed A, B, and C, everything would be all right on a daily basis. One of the most fearful times in my life was not being sentenced to prison, was being accepted into the program that I'm on now. It's ISP, Intensive Supervision Program. I was shot down by parole and given a second chance by this program. But in the same minute that they told me they were going to send me home, I was overwhelmed with fear and anxiety, because prison is easy. Living in jail is very, very simple. It's very easy. You don't walk out of line, and everything's fine. Coming home for me would be more of the same. I was talking about being fearful of coming home because of the stigma that I've lived throughout my whole life, my adult life anyway. I just felt I should just fit the bill. I should just be the criminal. I should just be the drug addict, and that's what everybody expects from me. Thank God for the program that you've started. Thank God for, I'll even go a step further. My parole officer today, who's actually a very caring individual, who actually takes time to talk to me on a personal level, gets to know me. Thank God that guy is there to make me feel like I am a person and not just a criminal. Jason said it. I have a lot of gratitude in my life. I have a lot of gratitude for the people who have reached out to me, who have tried to help me. Some have failed. I don't say they failed because the message was planted. I may have failed temporarily, but I just appreciate that people are willing to give us another shot again and again and again, because it really isn't over until it's over. I see guys, I'm also an active member in a 12-step program. I see guys that come into this program at 60 and 70 years old and turn their life around. It's never over, Thank God I got it at 29 years old.
Our next speaker, Ivan Mishula, has a truly remarkable story. He's a graduate of Yale. Around the time of his 20th reunion, he got a questionnaire as to how he was doing, and he was sitting in a federal prison in Otisville when he got that. Since that time, he has left. He has gone to John Jay. He's on the faculty there. He is going and working for his doctorate, and he does remarkable work throughout New York and the metropolitan area on prison reentry, and I give you Evan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mayor Phillip. Obviously, thank you, Governor. And thank you to the faculty of this university for making this room available for such an important topic. And so I want to talk to you about one small fact that U.S. Attorney Fishman mentioned, which is that 1 in every 28 children in the United States, 1 in every 9 African American children in the United States has a parent who's incarcerated. So, there are a large number of law enforcement and court personnel in this room, some of whom have their guns out, and most of you don't. But I just want to say that how you treat people as they're going through the criminal justice procedures has a tremendous effect on whether people believe that they will ever be accepted again. We all make mistakes. We all do. Some of us are lucky enough to be punished for those, and others make bigger ones later on. And so I certainly made mine, and when I was at the bottom and sitting in federal prison and didn't know whether or not I was ever going to get a job again, whether someone who had been given so much and let it all slip through their hands could ever come back. There were people that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That is a tremendous asset. No piece of academic evidence like the nothing works stuff that came out in the 1970s could ever be true. The work that many of the people do in this room with people who are still struggling is valuable. I know it's valuable not just because I've reviewed the literature or that I am currently engaged in evaluation practice at John Jay. I know because it was valuable to me when I was lost in that desert. I guess it's Passover and Easter, so everybody's sort of saying it. And so I want to thank you. Even if I don't know you personally, I want to thank you for the work that you do for the people who are not yet able to say thank you. Because at some point, with enough work and a little bit of luck, maybe they will be. These are programs worth your time. I have to cite some academic literature, right? For every $1 that is spent on a college program in prison, a state reaps $3 in benefits in future tax revenue and in reduced incarceration costs going forward. There's been a lot of talk about the 66% failure rate of returning felons, but what is lost sometimes on that old statistic from 1994 is that there is a lot of state-by-state variation in that, and that variation is worth billions of dollars. I only say it because it opens up the possibility. New York State has reduced the number of prisoners it holds from 72,000 to 56,000. That generates $4 billion a year for New York State. I hope that the federal government and that New Jersey will be able to reduce its prison population by a similar amount so that the taxpayers of New Jersey can enjoy those benefits. Thank you very much for your time.
Our next speaker immediately to my left is a very strong man who did some hard time in New Jersey State's prison. He went through the Integrity House program, and now he gives back in the Fathers Now program. He mentors and he runs Bible study programs.
I like to say that my journey started at a real early age. I started drinking at the age of 4. My parents kept a lot of alcohol around the house, so it was easy to get access. to drinking. So I started drinking at an early age, and it had a profound influence on my life. I knew I was in trouble at an early age, and I wanted to commit suicide. I used to play out in the traffic. My mother told me I got hit by a truck, police car, taxi, a regular car. I mean, I used to play dangerous game out in the traffic because I was intoxicated. So for you parents who keep a lot of alcohol in the home and you got small ones, be careful, because you never know. They can get a hold of that and not even let you know it, and then before you know it, you got trouble on your hand. But what I did was, in my youth, I grew up in the city of Detroit. In my youth, I was always running around, always getting in trouble. And I would get in trouble. What I did to avoid prison and jail, I would always run. If I did something, I would run. One thing that really helped me at an early age was that I ran to the military. Okay, I knew I needed some really strong discipline in my life, and 10 years of military, gave me a lot of training. But what I took with me was my desire to get high in drugs, because it moved from one point to the next. I was doing all types of drugs. Well, in my travel in the military, I learned to speak. I speak fluent German, Korean, so I got to see the world. But when my father passed in 1980, that had a profound effect on my attitude. So I started back to really using drugs in the military. And they was on the verge of putting me out. But I was smart enough, smart enough. I keep saying smart enough, but I found a way to get by and leave the military with an honorable discharge. But coming home, growing up in the city of Detroit, I found myself getting with the wrong crowds, and there I am back down that street. Then I was introduced to the crack cocaine, that lifestyle, and when using that stuff, it really puts you in another zone, and you find yourself doing things that you thought you'd never do in your life. And I found myself hurting people and doing things that I thought was really crazy, but seemed like I didn't have any control. In and out of treatment facilities, it only helped momentarily. I knew I needed a power much greater than myself to really bring me back to sanity. And so for 45 years, I avoided the law by running from state to state, because by traveling all over states, I knew I could go here. I knew how to live here. I'd go there and live, because, getting a job, temporary service. So I'll run from the law. After I do a crime, I'll run. So I avoided prison by running, okay? And so for 45 years, I did that. And then at the age of 45, I remember being in a park. I had a pint of Irish Rose, and I was doing crack cocaine, and it seemed like the weight of everything I was doing, okay, fell upon me. And I fell to my knees and I prayed, and I asked God to come into my life, okay? And the treatment facilities wasn't enough for me. I needed something much stronger. And fell to my knees. I took a toy gun. 2 days later, I was sticking people up with a toy gun. I figured, well, I'm not going to hurt anybody, but I do want some money. So I thought, okay, if the law do catch up with me, they're not going to give me much time for using a toy gun to take advantage of people. And but I found out that wasn't the case. Because it was a threat to their lives, even though I wasn't intending, I'm not going to hurt them, but because they felt that way. So I got a little taste of the law now. And all this time I've been running now I'm at that dead end. And I remember praying. And I remember I'm waiting for the pizza delivery guy coming. I'm sitting there with a toy gun, and I see an unmarked car coming. For somehow I knew to run, because I always knew how to avoid the law. But for this time, I stood there, and I couldn't move. It's like a force had took hold of me. And when it was 2 undercover cops, and they came up, and that was it. I was given two first-degree armed robbery, looking at 40 years, and they ended up giving me I ended up taking it to trial, which don't ask me why, but I mean all the evidence was there. But anyway, they said I was looking at 40 years, so they ended up giving me. I had to go into the trial. I lost the trial, and they gave me a 1585, and I one of the things that the prosecutor did where he had, because I knew if you get arrested, don't talk. That's one of the things I knew. But anyway, through that, right, I started going to Bible study. I knew this is the time. If I'm and I believe that the Lord put me here for a purpose. Okay, now I'm looking at now I'm doing a 1585. What you gonna do with your time? So I figured this is the time to really learn, really draw close to God. You know what I mean? And really get that power that's way greater than yourself into your life. So I Bible study. I started taking Christian living classes. I started taking deacon classes. I just started really I went on a learning spree. I just started learning. I learned how to do horticulture. I learned how to do electronics. I learned how to do HVAC, plumbing. What else? I did the palliative care for 2 years. I worked with terminal ill people, and that what really took me down a spiritual journey, watching people die at Southwood Prison, and watching terminal people die. You know, being there, praying for them, and leading a lot of them to Christ. And that time in prison, those 10 years and 2 months that I did in prison was a real spiritual journey for me. And a transformation was taking place during that time. You know, I learned to let go and let God, and keep him on the throne and me down here, and I'll be all right. Okay, well, okay. So through it all, I had a sense of direction. I had a purpose. I knew what my purpose in life was. You know, I was a taker now to become a giver. So at the assessment center, Bo Robinson, I went to Integrity House. 4.5 months in Integrity House, I met Jim. He was a spiritual guide, teacher there. And I drew close to him, became good friends. And that was my journey. And then then from there, Cure Halfway House, I didn't think I had a chance for a job. I remember being up at a Father Now program. This is a program for fathers who's trying to get their life back on track. So, and I'm there in the computer room, this small little Jewish guy comes and tapped me on the shoulder and asked me who I was. And I said, I'm Larry. He said, I have a job for you. He gave me a job at in security. So I work in security for a 10-story, 300 employees. So I'm security for that. And I'm an ex-felon, you know. I'm a criminal, and this is how I've been blessed, you know, by doing the right thing, you know. And then I was offered a teacher job in health and nutrition. Okay, health and nutrition. So I did my research, and I learned how, you know, I learned all about nutrition, health, and everything. And next thing I know, I'm teaching guys how to take care of their children, their wives, and everything. And I'm teaching mothers how to take care of their babies, you know. Anybody know what cholesterol is? Cholesterol? Okay, well, that's that yellowish, goldish milk that women have in their first 4 or 5 days. Well, anyway, that...
Larry, we got two speakers.
Okay, well, anyway, that started me on a journey of success. Okay.
Larry. Our next speaker is Helena Mohammed, who you've heard mentioned. She's beloved to all, and she's the director of the women's program in the Hudson County Jail. Helena?
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I'd like to say good morning to everyone and tell you guys that you have an opportunity that I got and I received in 2011. A man or woman without a dream or a purpose will vanish. And I'm very grateful to be a part of many of the people in this room's dream and vision to continue the work we've been started in Hudson County and other counties are dying to become involved in. I'm very honored and privileged to be a part of someone else's dream and vision to help people re-enter society in a more positive manner and be successful. I do drug and alcohol work inside the Hudson County Correctional Center. A dream and vision of Oscar Avila is the director of the Hudson County Correctional Center. I've had the opportunity never to be incarcerated. However, on February 18th in 2011, I made a decision that I was going to be locked up every day voluntarily with women. We started out with a women's program in the Hudson County facility, providing a therapeutic community environment for women to begin to recover in. And then a year later, we started a program for males with co-occurring disorders. So we have men and women at the county level receiving drug and alcohol treatment on a daily basis. We program from 9 to 5 inside of the Correctional Center. These men and women have been afforded the luxury through the Hudson County Reintegration Program of being filtered into society, into housing units, and continued treatment at various vendors throughout the Hudson County community. And for this, I'm very grateful for all the vendors because this came from us and went to the hands of, in the care of someone else, and can sit here today and tell a story of success from start going toward the end. I'm going to keep it very short. Thank you. Please continue to support the efforts of the reentry people in our community. Thank you.
Our final speaker, Eugene McKnight, is part of the fiber and marrow of Jersey City. He's held responsible jobs. He had a big fall. He comes back and he mentors. He works on the streets with gangs. He works with the homeless. And he'll go anywhere if he can help people. And I now introduce Gene McKnight.
A lot of people in this room know me. I'm gonna give you a little history about, first of all, who I am and where I come from. Former director of the Department of Human Resources, former director of the Community Development Block Grant, vice president of Emmett Realty, former director of the CAA program. It's a state program that used to oversee all the human resources throughout the state of New Jersey. I had a staff of 1,700 people, a budget of $40 million. So I think I was a very, very productive individual prior to going to the system. I'm going to start off by saying going in, preparing to go into the system. I thought to myself, am I really going to be locked up? Not Gene McKnight. This can't be happening to me. And when reality set in, and I'm going to be very honest with everybody, I fear no one but God, but I actually became afraid. I said to myself, in the next 2 months, I'm going into jail, a subculture, something that I've heard about, from individuals that I've known that gone into the system. I said, this can't be happening to me. So I said, let me prepare myself. And each day, as it began to wind down, I said, well, I got 3 days to go, 2 days to go. And when I finally got there, I said, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to handle this. And I thought, first I went to Holding, then they transported me to several different other facilities until I wound up in Marlborough State Prison. And during that course of time, I said, well, how am I gonna handle this? Am I gonna just do something stupid or just keep the mindset of being positive? So, going in, I think was the most, and I'm gonna basically deal with what's here already. And going in, I think was the most difficult part of my journey. And then I said, okay, well, going in is difficult, but what about coming out? When I came out, I had a lot of friends. Going in, I had a lot, prior to going in, I should say, I had a lot of friends. former director of human resources, some high-powered jobs. But when I came out, the friendship so-called number that was maybe 100 at one time dwindled down to about 10. I'd see people on the street and they treated me like I had the bubonic plague. I mean, I said to myself, I can't believe this. And all the people that I've helped over my lifetime in the various positions that I've had, and it really began to make me realize that nobody knows you when you're down and out. I think that's an old Wilson Pickett song. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. And that's what I said to myself, the value of true friendship. The struggles really determine friendship. It's not based on when you're doing good. It's based on when you're doing bad or when you're broke. People begin to we really can identify who your true friends were. And it was very, very difficult, extremely. I was able to, the struggle, was the most difficult part. I was a productive individual prior to going in, so it was a little easy for me in terms of, even though, most of the so-called friends that I thought that when I got out of the system would be able to help me, it just didn't work out that way. And it took me a long time to really be productive again. But during that course of time, I said to myself, well, since you can't find a job, to try to encourage other folks, or I should say discourage other folks not to go into the system. So I became a walking advisor, seeing individuals that I know, and I said, listen, that's not where you want to be. And they say insanity is doing something wrong over and over and expecting different results. That's what insanity is. Because if you do something wrong, you're going back, or you're going into the system. There's no doubt about that. And, I was able to survive, I think, because of the strength that I had prior to going in. And that's the most difficult part. Most of the individuals who are coming out of the system right now, they're coming out with a zero base. So they're looking, who's going to help me? And it gets to a point where you can't find that help, and then they look back towards the street. So it's important that we think about positive people, places, and things. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, one thing you'll notice is every person on our panel gives back. And that's one of the reasons that they got to the other side. There's a saying in NA and AA, you got to give it away to keep it. And that's what they have done. And I think everybody should remember that there are people very similar to the fine people we have here about to leave the prisons now, and all they need is a little support.
To introduce again, and I've said this time and time again, no governor has done more for addiction treatment in the history of this state than our governor, Chris Christie. Can we have another round of applause? Today we talked a little bit about earlier in terms of addiction, and you've made that a primary focus of your administration in terms of treatment. Could you just share with us a little bit about your experience at Daytop and how you became involved and committed
Sure.
to the importance of treatment over incarceration?
Well, first off, thanks to the panel. I think it's always good for those of us who are in positions of responsibility to hear stories directly from folks who've been affected in their lives by the system that they've had to go through and how they found their way to the other side in a successful way. So I was happy to be able to sit here and listen to some of that directly. Back in 1995, so nearly 20 years ago, I became a freeholder in Morris County, and I was assigned to oversee the Department of Human Services as my area of responsibility. And that's when I first became acquainted with Daytop Village in Mendham, which is an inpatient adolescent drug rehabilitation facility. And what I found when I started to oversee them was I heard the stories from Father Joe Hennon, who was the founder of Daytop, New Jersey, and operating it at that time, that they had lots of children in Morris County who needed drug treatment, but because insurance didn't cover it and their family didn't have the resources, they weren't able to get it. And so one of the first things I did as a freeholder was to work with the other freeholders to say that that just shouldn't be, that if, in fact, a child in Morris County is in need of drug rehabilitation, that they should be able to go and the county should pay for it. For the reasons that were mentioned by some of the folks up here in a different context, that kind of investment over the short term pays a yield in the long term that's multiples over what we pay. So we got that program established, and it's still there today. Sure. No child in Morris County goes without drug rehabilitation if they need it. But that's what got me involved with DATOP, because once I was doing that, I felt an even greater sense of responsibility to find out how they made things work there. And after I left the freeholder board involuntarily in 1997, I was asked by Father Hennon to join the board at DATOP, and I did, and remained on the board until I became United States Attorney in 2002, and have continued to be involved in the place as a private donor and supporter in the years since then. And to me, it's an extraordinary place because I said it's one of the only places in the world that I can go to on a daily basis and see miracles happen. And they do every day.
Every day. We talked a little bit about earlier that 70% of people behind bars are in active addiction. And you were kind enough to come up to Hudson County Jail and see some of the women, and some of the great women are here.
And they were on the panel, too.
Yes, and they were on the panel. Could some of our women stand up?
Yeah.
Like, don't be shy, whatever.
Yeah.
And so just in terms, and you've made drug court a real focus. How do you think we can do more to divert people away from incarceration to treatment programs, and why do you think that's so critically important?
Well, first of all, because incarceration's failed.
By the way, it's not often that a governor of a state, could somebody please applause that? I will.
Well, I mean, listen, I know what you mean politically, that a lot of people are unwilling to say that, but the facts are pretty clear that if you send someone into incarceration with an addiction and you do little or nothing to help give them the tools to deal with that addiction, and then you release them back into society addicted, why is anybody surprised that they then commit additional crimes in order to feed their addiction? It makes no sense. And I think that while the war on drugs was started with the best of intentions, I think we now have 30 plus years of proof to show us that it's not being effective in the main. And so what we're doing in New Jersey and what we did together with the legislature was to say that over the next 3 years now, because we're into the third year of the phase-in, of a 5-year phase-in, that any nonviolent first-time offender who has a drug addiction problem will not be incarcerated. They'll be sent to inpatient drug rehabilitation. This makes sense from my perspective twofold. First off, no life is disposable. And we see folks up on this panel today, and I've seen others over the course of time, where that if these folks get the help that they need to effectively deal with what is an illness, that they can become, once again, good mothers and fathers, good husbands and wives, good sisters and brothers, good sons and daughters. And that's huge for our society. But let's say I have a group of people in here who are just cold-hearted, that you don't care about whether a life is disposable or not. And you're, let's say you're like my father, you're an accountant, and all you do is count the money, Well, in New Jersey, we have a situation where annually it costs us just short of $40,000 a year to incarcerate someone. Drug rehabilitation therapy for inpatient for a year is about half that. So if all you care about is the money, well, it makes sense from a fiscal perspective as well. And then when you add the multiplier to it, that when those folks have effective treatment, have the tools to deal with their illness, that, as Larry was mentioning before, they become employed. They pay taxes. They become not only tax-paying members of society, but part of the societal fabric. They once again are productive members of their families, raising children. They are volunteers. They're helping others. all things that they were not or could not do when they were in the throes of the addiction illness. And so to me, this is, I think, the most important thing that we've done in the last 5 years to make New Jersey a better society. And that's why, we're going to continue to do it.
Thank you. Can we, so in our program, and we heard the mayor talk earlier that we're 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's incarcerated population. And as we shared, with 70% of the people behind bars are incarcerated. We're doing some good things with integrity, and Helena Muhammad and Ellen Egan. The other thing is job barriers. And whether it's cities or counties or the state or the private sector, there's a great nun in Trenton State, and Sister says to me, Jim, well, ex-offenders should have first preference to have jobs. And I said, Sister, that's a little radical. She says, but if we're talking the talk about getting people hired, we have to bring people back into employment. And so how do we address those institutional barriers that Larry talked about, that Gene talked about?
Well, I think a few things. First of all is our approach to it has to lead towards destigmatization. Right now, if we continue to treat drugs as an offense and not an illness, the stigma that comes along with offense, and Gene was talking about this, about 100 friends on the way in and 10 friends on the way out. Well, the fact is that if we continue to not educate the public of the fact that this is an illness, and this is an illness that can happen to anyone, regardless of education, regardless of economic condition, regardless of family status, any of those things, this can happen to you. That's one of the ways. Second way is there's certain ways government can do it too. And we're in the midst now of negotiating with the legislature an entire criminal justice reform package that could include things like ban the box. And
Senator Cunningham's legislation.
Right. And I'm working with Sandy and with the Senate President and the Speaker to come up with things that do two things. One, on those who commit really violent acts in our society repeatedly, well, those people need to be incarcerated. They need to be off the street because they're putting our families at risk. And in New Jersey, we don't have the ability to do that prior to trial because we have a constitution that says that everyone must get offered bail. Now, if you fix that part of it, on the flip side, we have thousands of people in our jails, our county jails and our state prisons, who are there because they couldn't make $2,500 in bail.
Thank you.
And they're not violent. And they're not an ongoing threat to society. What I think we need to do is get those people out, put them back on the street. And fortunately, I don't think that we'll have enough violent people to fill those jail cells of all the people who are the nonviolence. And if in fact that's what happens, then you're going to be able to see us save money from the perspective of closing a state prison, reducing the census in county jails. And that makes sense for us from a fiscal perspective, but it also makes sense for us in terms of getting people back onto the road to being productive citizens, to be able to be employed, and to reduce that stigma of having to sit in jail sometimes just because you're addicted. And so for me, I think lowering those barriers is about taking away the stigma to the extent that we can.
Yep.
But then also doing some practical things from a legal perspective that will allow people to make that transfer more easily.
And you touched on bail reform, and for many of the women that I work with, and Joe Russo from the Public Defender's Office, we find women that are in jail, Governor, frankly, for 9 months at a time, simply because they can't pay $250.
Right.
So in terms of an agenda, where do you see and how quickly do you think we can implement bail reform so that our justice system works for, God willing, all of us, not just those of us who have the financial means?
Well, I've been pushing for bail reform for 2 years. When we first did the drug rehabilitation piece, the deal I thought I had made with the legislature was we'll do drug rehabilitation and bail reform together. What you find as governors, sometimes you make deals and you stay on your side and the other side doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So sometimes it's a process, as you know. I think we can get bail reform done before June. I think there is now a consensus in the legislature to get this done, and I'm encouraged that it will get done before June. And then what we need to do is set up a system similar to what we have in the federal system. You know, people can go out on supervised release. It works in the federal system. There's no reason it can't work in the state system. And it probably will take us another 6 months to a year to set up that structure to be able to have people supervised in a responsible way. But it's going to be much better than, as you said, having people sit in prison for months and months because they don't have $250 to make bail. And these are not folks who are, in general, a threat to the health or safety of the citizens in their neighborhoods. And you know, it's not cost effective for us, but more important to me is you just are making people further and further depressed. The more you keep them in prison, knowing that the only reason they're there is because they made a mistake. And I think it was Matt who said everybody makes mistakes, and they do. Yep. And secondly, because they don't have the wherewithal, and so they're really in the equivalent of a debtor's prison. And that's not what we should be doing in our society, in my view.
I just want to say a heartfelt thank you. And I wasn't even going to say this, but, you know, obviously I've had my own challenges in life. And there are few people who have been as decent and kind and compassionate and good as Chris Christie. And so I want to thank him for being here today. I want to thank him for being a clear, strong, powerful voice as to the need for treatment over incarceration, for visiting our women in Hudson County, for Mary Pat coming to Integrity in the basement of one of our facilities and spending hours with our women, and for the governor being here at the mayor's conference to lifting up his voice, not only here in Hudson County, not only in the state, but God willing, nationally, so that America can be her best, not only for those in this room, but for those sitting in prison cells throughout this country. Governor, on behalf of all of us, a heartfelt thank you and blessed Easter. Thanks,